however many years in the future you are looking at this, I suspect that if I start actually trying to recite Jack Lemmon's film credits, you're going to hit the fast forward. So let me say instead that Mr. Lemmon is one of the most honored actors of our lifetimes, both as a leading actor and as a supporting actor, both as a comic actor and a dramatic actor, as a film actor, a stage actor, and a television actor. His television credits, you may not know, extend back at least to 1947. Along the way, he also found time to give a few years to the Screen Actors Guild, where he served as a board member and as third vice president. And we'll be talking about all of that, so stay away from the fast forward button. You didn't exactly come from a show business family, did you? Was it donuts?
Yeah, my family had, although they were supportive, almost, when I went into the theater, or wanted to go into the theater as a kid, neither of them really had any experience to any great extent in show business, although my mother, who just thought that me trying to be an actor was the greatest thing since Saran Wrap, had wanted to be a singer, but her family said, "You do not do that. A young lady does not go into the theater, let alone the musical theater," blah, blah, blah. She had a lovely voice. At any rate, my dad was a pretty good soft shoe dancer. And at times he had dabbled as a kid before he went into business, playing N-Man on minstrel shows and stuff. And but he eventually ended up in the baking industry and was vice president and general sales manager of the Donut Corporation of America. Made everything but donuts. But they made those machines, and years ago, maybe when you were a kid, you remember the Maxwell House coffee shops had machines making donuts, and you could stand there and just sort of like a tennis match. You just watch the donuts go by on a trail as they were made and came out of the machine in the window. Anyway, he did all of that stuff and was very successful at it. But he really enjoyed dancing and singing, and he was pretty good. And I remember once when Bill Robinson was doing the Hot Mikado, I think it was, a Billy Rose show. And we were living just outside of Boston in Newton, Mass. And they were playing Boston before going to New York, as most shows did. And Dad knew, I think it was Edgar McGregor, was the name of the director. Anyhow, we all ended up going to the show one night, which was wonderful, and then going to the Latin Quarter, which was a nightclub, for supper afterwards. And it was a weekend, so although I was extremely young, I don't know, 10 to 12 maybe or less, I got to go. And when they were there, they called the MC who was doing the show at the Latin Quarter, called Bill Robinson up, who of course was extremely famous, and asked him if he would do a number. And Bill Robinson said yes. He says, but he had been sitting next to Dad, and they'd been talking, and I guess Dad mentioned that he had done some soft shoe. He says, "I've got a gentleman here I'd love to have join me." And the next thing I knew, my old man was up there. And I was bug-eyed that he would be dancing with Bill Robinson, but he did. And they were terrific. The audience started hooting and hollering and so forth. And then my dad turned and hollered towards the wings and said, "Have you got any sand?" I didn't know what he was talking about, but they came out with a pail of sand in the fire bucket or something. And Dad just put his hand in, and then he sprinkled some. And Bill Robinson started laughing, as he knew exactly what he was doing. And then they both started doing a shuffle dance together to like Tea for Two or something in the sand dancing, as my dad called it. And it was just great. It was marvelous. It makes a wonderful sound, that thing. And anyhow, I don't know how I got off into all of that, but my dad was not all that supportive when I the day I graduated from college, I asked him if I could borrow a couple of $100 and go down to New York and try to get an agent or get a part and get started in show business. And he was still hopeful that maybe it was just a passing fancy. I had done a couple of seasons of summer stock as an apprentice and played some parts at the Marblehead Players, which was an outstanding company in the country at that time, summer stock. And he was hoping that maybe I'd start at the bottom in his company and work my way up the way he had done. And I would have none of it because, excuse me.
How old were you when you decided you wanted to be an actor, and how long did you wait to tell your parents?
Oh, how old was I when I wanted to be an actor? I was about 8. It was a school play thing where I substituted for Billy Tyler. You know Billy, a kid up the street. And Billy was doing a play, a school play. It was a short one-actor that was going to be done during the lunch break at Rivers Country Day in Brookline, Mass., which is right next to Newton. And Billy got sick. So when I got to school, the teacher said, "You going on instead of Billy?" I said, "How am I going to learn that?" He says, "It's only one speech, it's about 14 lines. Try to learn it between classes." I said, "I'm never going to make that." And he said, "Well," he says, "if you just memorize what you can, I'll be sitting there with the book in the wings, and it's one speech for you. Just walk out into the center stage and say it to the audience. And if you miss a line, just stroll over to the side, and I'll give you the next line, and then you go back to center stage and deliver the thing." Well, I blew the first line. I said something, my bag or whatever, but I was wearing Billy's hat, he was a much taller, bigger boy than I was, although the same age. And the hat came down over my ears like this, a big black, like the cowboy villain hats, you know, the black hats. This thing set that like that, and a cape that dragged behind me like Marie Antoinette's train or something, but came down to Billy's ankles. Anyhow, they laughed before I ever started. And then I got a little shaken on that. I muttered something for a first line and trailed off. And then I looked over like that, and then I walked over to the side, and apparently I tilted like this to listen. They knew what I was doing and started laughing. He gave me the next line. I walked all the way to the center stage, said that line, could not think of the third line, did the same thing. Well, by now they were in hysterics, all the kids. And I had a choice of either saying, "I'm never, ever going to go on a stage again as long as I live," or, as happened, a little light went off and said, "I think I like this. This is fun," because they're enjoying me. And that really kicked me off. And it had nothing to do with talent, obviously. What it had everything to do with, I think, was being accepted by my peers. I think that that's a very strong motivation with kids, no matter what it may be, with woodworking or painting or any of the arts, or any way you can express yourself. If the other kids like it, then you're very apt to continue it. And if you do have an aptitude for it, then it'll come out.
Now, I know you did some early radio work and a craft television theater clear back in...
Yeah, The Arrival of Kitty.
The Arrival of Kitty. I've got one.
Is that what they
The
got
Easy
from
Mark,
the internet
several
stuff?
of them. The Easy Mark, Snooksy, Duet, and these are 1947. Although they seem to have air dates of 51 and 53. Any of this? Where did you really start the professional?
Yeah, but the first breaks that I got when I got down to New York after a while, and it was not a long time, the so-called starving actor bit, you know, you can go for years and years, and then suddenly, boom. But it was about maybe a year and a half or so before I could get anything. And then I finally passed a general audition for the various agencies that did soap operas. Barton and Bowles or whatever it was, Benton and Bowles, and a few of the others. Anyhow, Shortly after I passed that audition, I flunked a few first. I got a call to read for a part on Brighter Day. And the director was a Mr. Hanna, a very sweet man. And I showed up, it was a rainy day at NBC, and I did the reading. I was nervous as hell, and what I would do in the reading was that because what training I had been in the stage, I kept walking away from the mic and then coming back to the mic as if I was addressing somebody. I remember it was a confrontation scene, and I was mad. So I'd say something, and I'd turn and walk a few steps away and then say something and then come back to the mic and so forth. It took him an hour to get me to stay at the mic. Anyhow, I always found, I must say, to jump ahead for a second, I have tremendous respect for good radio actors. I really do, because to me, it was always the most difficult medium, because I had only my voice and my body meant nothing. And I found that very, very difficult. And I blew more lines doing regular parts on soap operas than I ever did in live TV or in the theater, or certainly in film, far and away. But anyway, we finished the audition, and I was just standing there. And then Mr. Hanna said, "That's very good, and thank you. And would you please wait?" So I thought, well, that's good. So I waited outside, and then about 20 minutes later, after a couple of other guys had read, he called me back in, and I walked back in and instinctively went over towards the mic. And I looked towards the booth where he was to see what he wanted, whether I should read some more or what. And he said, "What service are you with?" I said, "I was in the Navy." He said, "That's very funny." He said, "What service are you with?" And I said, "Well, what do you?" He says, "Don't you have a service so you can get your calls?" And I said, "What calls?" I said, "If the phone rings and I'm home, I answer it. I don't. Anyway, I was really that naive. I didn't know what he was talking about. He said, "Well, get a service. In the meantime, is there a phone number where we can tell you when you're going to work?" And I said, "When I'm going to work?" I said, "You mean I got the part?" He says, "Yes." I said, "Oh, God, thank you." And I gave him my girlfriend's phone number as I was sleeping on her couch. And then walked over, and I picked up my raincoat, my hat, and my umbrella, and my briefcase, and I left. And I just jumped outside on 49th Street, and I grabbed the bus. And 49th or 50th, I've forgotten which way they went, and went down towards 3rd Avenue to my girlfriend's apartment. And I got all the way up in the apartment, and she looked at me and said, where did you get the briefcase? I had taken the director's hat, the director's umbrella, and the director's briefcase and walked out with them without even thinking. I left my own hat over on another chair. Anyhow, I didn't have a coat in those days, and it got raining like hell. But I bought myself one a couple of weeks later, now that I had a part. The phone rang, and it was the director. He says, "I'll sit here and wait. Will you bring back my belongings, please?" He was very sweet to me, and I think that he really enjoyed the fact that I was so naive about the whole thing. Anyway, that started me, and then after that, I got a running part on Road of Life as young Dr. Brent. And for a couple of years, I did those two shows, and an occasional other radio show that I would get from somebody who heard those two. And then finally, I got a break in television with on Kraft Playhouse, or is that what they call it? Kraft, yeah, Kraft Television Theater. Maury Holland was the director. Boy, things are coming back that I never thought of. The Arrival of Kitty was about a $50 ripoff of Charlie's Aunt, is what it was, which they could never afford. But the arrival of Kitty, they could. Somebody wrote the thing, and it really was a steal from Charlie's Aunt, up and down. And I had got the lead in that for my first television show. And I remember working with a terrific guy named Dort Clark, who was an old friend and an actor. I'm not sure that Dort is still with us. I'm not sure. Anyway, Dort was the seasoned pro there because he had done about 6 or 7 small parts on Broadway, and he had done some live TV. Of course, it was all live then. This was back in the 40s, something rather, I don't know, 47 or 8, I don't know. And he kept coming up to me, and he'd say, look, if you have any trouble or anything, just ask me in between. Don't worry about it. Don't bug the director. He says, I'll help you out. And our very first scene was he was talking to an assistant manager at a hotel desk, at the reception desk, when I walked up to ask if I could get my room or whatever or something or other. And Dort had the first line when he turned and saw me approaching the desk. So just before we go on, he says, now don't worry, just relax and just figure you've done this 100 times. Do it exactly like you were doing in rehearsal. You were terrific. Don't worry about a thing. With that, the red light goes on. Dort goes in and starts talking to the guy behind the thing. I get my cue. I walk in, I walk up, and Dort looks at me and doesn't say a damn thing. And I don't know what the hell to do. And so I look at him, and I look at the kid behind the desk, and I nod, and I look at Dort, and I'm looking at Dort with the thing, and then Dort says, what's my line? I said, He says, what's my line? So I ad-libbed something, I don't know what, and we finally got off the hook. But it seemed to me an eternity before we got into the scene. And we kept getting the hurry up signal from every scene, during every scene from then on.
Did you give this story to David Mamet for A Life in the Theater?
No, I did Life in the Theater.
You must have drawn on this.
Yeah, David Mamet's play. I loved it. I love Mamet anyhow. I think he's one of our really great writers.
When you started with 2 Judy Holliday pictures in the same year. Which came first? Poof, poof, poof. I can't say it. Or it Should Happen to You.
There was, and It Should Happen to You. It Should Happen to You was the first one. That was the first film I ever did. And I did that because I was one of the many sort of stuck-up young actors in the theater that really thought that film was, for pretty curly-haired young boys, but certainly not for an actor, not me. Pardon me for hitting my mic right there. I've rapidly changed my mind because of Judy Holliday. I'll get to that in a second. But it was written by Garson Kanin. And of course, he and Judy Holliday had done Born Yesterday on Broadway, and then the film. And directed by George Cukor, who was a great actor's director. He was known as a woman's director because he did the women and so forth. But he was just a great director of actors, period. And
can you remember something specific
about George?
Him? Yeah, an example of how he would work with you.
Yes, I think the best piece of direction I ever got, as a single piece of direction, was from George. And what happened was George would keep saying to me, because I had just done a Broadway revival of not Three Men and a Horse, but Front Page. No, not Front Page. Room Service, the old George Abbott farce. And someone from Columbia had seen me in that and recommended me They were looking for a leading man to be with Judy Holliday, and they had been so far unable to find someone that they liked for that particular part in It Should Happen to You, and they thought I should be tested. Well, when I found out it was Judy Holliday and written by Gar Kanan and to be directed by George Cukor, and I read the script and it was a wonderful part, I said, you betcha, I want to test for that. But I don't want to sign one of those 7-year contract things where they own your body and soul and you're going to do whatever they tell you to do. So they agreed to a contract where I could come back and do 4 shows in New York during the 7-year period at any time I wanted, and they would just add that time on. And also I could do outside pictures, which was lucky that we got that one, because my 3rd picture or 4th picture I've forgotten was Mr. Roberts. And that was a big turning point in my career, naturally. Anyway, talking about George Cukor. Now, I had just come from the stage and doing a stage play. And although I had done a lot of live TV, a tremendous amount by then, I don't know, about 400 shows or something, I guess, by the time I got out here. I still had not worked at all in film and didn't know anything about film. And each medium does have its own technique to an extent. I mean, you don't act the same way in the theater that you act on film by a long shot, because your performance will be way over the top. But George, at the end of every take that I would do with Judy, and we got along just great, and we'd do a scene and think it was great, and we'd look at each other and go, like that. George would say, cut, print. He says, that's wonderful. He said, Jack, George had a kind of a jutting jaw and a slight lisp. He'd say, Jack, it's very, very good, but it's less, a little less. Once more, just less. If I heard the word less once, I heard it 1,000,000 times. I was beginning to get stomach aches out of the tension and the apprehension, and stay awake all night and everything, just worrying about the next day, because I knew what I wanted to do in the scene, and I knew he was going to say less. So finally, one day, which was very unlike me, at the end of a take in the best scene in the film that I had, where I have a big blow up with Judy, and then storm out of the room, come right back through the door and say, is it still on for Friday lunch? And she says, of course. I say, thank you very much, and close the door. It was a marvelous scene that Gar wrote. Anyway, we did it, and sure enough, it was Jack, just one more less, a little less. And I just turned and I blurted it out. I don't know why. I said, are you trying to tell me not to act? He says, oh, God, yes. Oh, yes, yes, yes. And it was the best piece of direction I ever got. Don't let the acting show.
Now, Judy Holliday was a sort of, would you call her a helpless kind of a person?
No, Judy Holliday, I would not call helpless. She could make you feel a little helpless. The thing that I absolutely adored about Judy stems from the tests that we did on. I got up my nerve about the second day when we were doing testing a couple of scenes together, and it was all going fine. And I said, Judy, would you like to have dinner tonight? And she said, I'd love to. Whereabouts? And I said, well, I'll find out, and I'll let you know in a little bit. She said, okay. And I said, I'll pick you up. And she said, terrific. She was in a rented house on Sunset Boulevard. And so I called up William Morris Agency and spoke to Harold Becker, one of the agents there, and he arranged for me to be able to pick a car up and rent a car at the end of the day's work. I found out where Judy's house was, and he suggested an Italian restaurant in the valley and told me how to get there. I wrote all of this down. So I go, and I got the car, I don't know, a Plymouth or a Chevy or something or other. It's just a nice, simple little car. I drove it to where Judy lived, picked her up, and we drove back towards town on Sunset, and I went up and over past the hotel. Yeah, I went up over Coldwater, and I got up to the top onto Mulholland, and as I started down onto the valley side, bang, flat tire. So I pulled over it, and I could see lights down below. And I told Judy, I said, now look, I said, don't worry, don't panic, don't worry. She says, I'm not worried. And I said, now when I get out, I'm going to go down there because I know I'm sure those lights are a gas station, or there's one right there. I'm just going to run down there, and they'll drive me back up, and they'll change the tire, and we'll be all set. Now lock the doors and just stay there, and don't worry, I'll be back in 15 minutes. In 15 minutes, felt like I was climbing Everest, even though I was going downhill, and I hadn't gotten anywhere. It's a long way. And so I said, well, hell, I'm never going to get down to the bottom for another hour, let alone find a gas station, unless I'm terribly lucky. And excuse me, I have a boulder in my eye. And so I came back to the car, and I knocked on the window. She opened the car door, and I got in, and I said, you okay? And she said, yeah, have you got a handkerchief? I said, well, sure. And I handed her a handkerchief. She started wiping her hands, and I said, what's that for? She says, I changed it. I said, what? She says, I changed the tire. Let's go. She got out and changed that damn tire while I was walking down to try to find someone to do it. So I felt a bit like an imbecile, but I was very grateful. But that's the kind of gal she was. She was just something else. She and George Cukor made that experience so wonderful that I moved from New York out here about a year later, and I had no intention of doing that. I was going to stay in New York, whether I was in or out of work at the Walgreens drugstore where I'd hang out. But I came on out and devoted most of my career to film from then on because I loved it so much.
And on the subject of weak-willed, wishy-washy, helpless kinds of people you may have encountered over the years, what can you tell me about Harry Cohn and Columbia Pictures?
Oh, Harry Cohn. Boy, did he run Columbia. Actually, I got along very well with Harry, despite all of the image that he had created, all of which was quite true. Harry was a very strange man because he could be very kind, if you will, or certainly very decent, but he also could be mean as hell. I mean, really mean to people. The stories, without mentioning any names, of how he has treated various writers, directors, and producers are legend. Those were the ones that he was toughest with. Terrible things, and saying terrible things and doing terrible things to them that were unjustified and unnecessary. Tough is another good word for Harry. For instance, when I finally got the part through a fluke with John Ford directing in Mr. Roberts, I was certainly entitled to do outside pictures and make my own deal. And as long as I did 2 a year for Columbia. And of course, trying to do 3 pictures in 1 year was and still is a very difficult thing to do. It isn't going to happen very often. But if it did occur that I had not done 2 pictures for them, then it's very simple. They would add another picture onto my contract. And remind me to tell you what happened with that contract. That's hysterical. Anyway, Harry would not give his approval at first. So I went in to speak to him, and I said, this is a great film, and this would be wonderful for my career, and therefore beneficial to your studio too. let alone just for me. And so forth. He says, yeah, but then you're going to come back here and you're going to want me to change the wallpaper in your dressing room and you're going to want this and a new chair and all of this and that. And I don't want to have any of that baloney. Baloney is not the word he used. I said, I promise you, I don't give a damn about the wallpaper in my dressing room, and I don't want anything except to do that film, which I should be allowed to do. And if I don't do another film this year for Columbia, I've forgotten I'd already done what year, but anyway, I had done one of the two. I said, we just tack it on. And finally he said, all right, but don't come back here looking for anything. And good luck. So I left. But he always basically was very good to me. And I think for one simple reason, he could not believe that he had an actor under contract that was a Harvard graduate. That threw him. He used to say, meet my Harvard boy. And that's all he ever called me, was his Harvard boy. And the first time I met him, which was at the very end of doing the first film, I never met him while we were shooting It Should Happen to You with Judy. I was looping, and Max Arno, who was responsible for my coming out there to test, he was the head of talent at Columbia then, a very sweet man, a lovely man, came down to the stage and said, the boss wants to see you. And I said, who, Harry Cohn? He says, yeah. And when I met him, he wanted me to change my name, slammed a writing crop down on his desk and said, the critics will use it like a baseball bat. They'll say Lemmon's a lemon and Cohn's got a lemon, the picture's a lemon and everything's a lemon. And I said, that's ridiculous. How often can a critic use this one gag thing of that performance is a lemon? And I said, what do you want to change it to? And he says, Lennon, Lennon. And I said, did you pronounce it Lennon? He says, yes. I said, they'll think I'm a Russian revolutionary. I was kidding, of course. He says, I looked that up. It's Lenin. Anyhow, I said, I don't want to change it. And I went back to New York. And about a month later, they called me back out and said, okay, you don't have to change it. Then after he previewed the film with Judy, he gave me bigger billing than my contract called for. That's where I say he can be kind and very considerate. He was terrific to me, but not always to other people. At his funeral, I think it was Red Skelton, when everybody turned out there from the industry, who looked around at the thousands of people and said, well, as Harry would agree, you just give the people something they want and you can't keep them away. But we got along great.
What finally happened with the Columbia contract?
Oh, with my contract with Columbia, after about 6 years, I still owed them about 4 pictures or 5 pictures or something or other that had been tacked on from doing Some Like It Hot in the Apartment and others later on in the contract when I was much more in demand. After Mr. Roberts, thank God. I think it was started with Days of Wine and Roses was the next one that I really wanted to do, that I did outside the studio. But what happened was that my agents one day said, you know something? That contract's not legal. And I had been thinking the same thing to myself because of Betty Davis and Olivia de Havilland when they raised hell with and sued Warner Brothers, I guess it was, and went to court, and it was decided you can't do that. You cannot extend the contract forever because it could go on forever. They've got you. So they didn't have them. Now, technically, according to the old contract, I still owe Columbia at least 2 films for about $8,000 apiece, which is, in this day and age, it's not very much money to play a lead in a film. But we both just sort of reached an amicable. Harry had gone by that time. We had an amicable parting of the ways. I first met Billy Wilder socially George Axelrod introduced me to him when they were doing, I believe, the Tommy Ewell play and film that Marilyn did for Billy. The 7-Year Itch. Yes, at whatever studio, I think it was Warner's or something, but it seems to me, visually in my mind, it looks like Warner's. But anyway, I was there for some reason or other, and I walked, I had done Mr. Roberts there, so every now and then I'd pop over. And George brought me in and introduced me to Billy. And so it was just socially, once or twice I met him, until he was going to do Some Like It Hot. And then one night at Dominic's Restaurant, which was a hangout in those days for everybody, little place with checkered tablecloths and great fried chicken and salads. Anyway, my future wife, Felicia, and I were having dinner there, and we had just ordered, and Billy Wilder and Audrey Wilder were at another table and were finishing up dinner and going to have coffee and dessert. And Billy came over, reintroduced himself, and I introduced him to Felicia. And then he just said, Jack, he said, I'd love to speak to you for about 10 seconds about a project I have. Would you stop by on your way out? We'll wait there. And I said, sure. I got very excited. My God, Billy Wilder, the great Billy Wilder, wow. So we raced through dinner, trying to look nonchalant, and went over and we sat down. And Billy, I won't attempt his accent because he gets mad as hell when I do, but he still has a very German accent. At any rate, it's unique. I always do it, and it comes out like a station house accent. It's, it's not very good. He said, well, we got these two young guys, and they're musicians, and they witnessed the St. Valentine's Day Massacre, but the guys see them. So now they're on the lam, and they're afraid they're going to be murdered, so they end up joining an all-girl orchestra so that they can escape and not be killed, which means that for about 85% of the film, you're going to be in drag. Do you want to do it? And I thought like this, and I said, well, why don't you just say, could I read the script? But I was smarter, thank God. I said, it's Billy Wilder. And I said, yes, I'd love to do it. And I hadn't read a word of the script. There wasn't any script, as it turned out. And he said, terrific. He says, you'll hear from me. I never heard from him for months. And then suddenly he called up and he said, I'm sending 60 pages up to your house. And I said, great. I still didn't have a deal. He sent 60 pages up. It was the funniest 60 pages I ever read. I still think it is the best comedy script I've ever read in my life. The second best was Neil Simon, who is no bum. And that was not Odd Couple, believe it or not. It's Odd Couple 2, which is not out yet. Coming out, I think, at Easter. And it is a magnificent script. But at any rate, it's the first time I was lying back on my couch in a little bitty house I had way in the far end of, technically Bel Air, which sounds fancy, but basically it was up a little side street off, what is it called? Not called, Glen what canyon? Beverly Glen, yeah, thank you. Anyhow, I was up there lying on my couch reading this, and I fell off the couch. The old straight line, the line about it was so funny, I fell off the couch laughing. It was just marvelous. It was tight and funny. The characters were great. I went crazy. I thought it was brilliant, and I said, he must want me to play the flake, which was correct. And we had Tony Curtis playing the other guy, and eventually Marilyn. But none of this did I know. at the time.
You just knew it was better than the last time you'd appeared in drag, which was a ripoff of Charlie's Aunt.
Yeah, yeah. The only other time was the ripoff of Charlie's Aunt, and boy, that was not in the same class. I want to tell you. At any rate, so I called my agent at William Morris, and I said, "What are we going to do about this thing?" He says, "Well, we're going to have to make a deal." Is one thing. So they called, and the wonderful thing about it was I had a dear friend, Dick Quine, who was a wonderful young director. He's no longer with us, unfortunately. And Dick and Blake Edwards were the two people that I met first when I came to town. When I went to Columbia to see Max Arnold the morning after I arrived out here for the test, he brought me down the hall to meet these two young writer-directors, he said, that I think are going to be very successful. And I went into what was really like a closet, and there was one desk, and each of them were on either side of it, but it was not a big desk. They were suited for that. It was a small desk, but they were there that way anyway. Blake on one side and Dick on the other, jammed into this little room with a half a window to get some air, and writing away on whatever they were working on. And we became friends immediately, and I'm still very close to Blake. Anyway, Billy was being bombarded by the Mirishes, who produced it at United Artists, to use a name. Various people, Frank Sinatra, Danny Kaye, oh gosh, I've forgotten, but at least 4 or 5 major stars had been thrown at Billy to play it. Billy had seen me in one of Dick Quine's pictures called Operation Madball, and he loved the picture, and he liked me very much in it, apparently, and said, "I want this guy Lemmon. That's who's going to play the part." Because he was Billy Wilder, that was it. The Mirishes gave up, and I don't think they were thrilled with it, but I was hired. And then we later became very close, and I did a number of pictures there. Anyway, we made a deal for, I don't know, 10 cents or something. And I got it, and they got Tony and Marilyn, and we were off to the races. And the rest of the script came in, and it was even funnier. It was a great, great experience. In working with Billy as a director, this will take a minute because I'll have to give you his philosophy first. Billy thinks of himself as a writer, primarily. And he has said to me, quote, unquote, and each word is exactly correct, when I have finished the final draft of whatever I'm writing, I consider 90% of the film completed. The other 10% is the drudgery of getting it on the screen. He doesn't realize how good a director he is. I mean that. He does not realize it and doesn't think of it that way. And as good as he is, I don't think of Billy as a great director. I think of him as one of the better directors, but a great filmmaker. In other words, he can take each and every scene and he knows how to direct it to make it the right size pearl in the strand so that the other scenes will be perfect around it. There are some directors, who can direct every scene, any scene you give them, bang, right on the nose. But when you get through, it doesn't exactly fit with the rest of the scenes. It doesn't make the strand of pearls that should be beautiful. Something's wrong. The size of some of the pearls isn't quite right with the others. But Billy is a great filmmaker. Probably today he's the greatest living filmmaker. Fellini's gone, but the great ones like Kurosawa and Fellini and Billy and a handful of others are truly great filmmakers, not just directors or writers. Now, when Billy is directing, he is one of the most willing of any director I've ever worked with to allow the actor to bring what he's got on his plate and try it. And as a matter of fact, he doesn't even want you to tell him or discuss it with him. When I had ideas on Some Like It Hot, the first film that we did together, I've done 8 with him, I think. 7 or 8, yeah. Or maybe 9, I don't know. Anyway, when I would have an idea about a scene, if I ever said to him, Billy, I have a thought, he said, no, you don't. He said, don't tell me, because I might misinterpret. Show me. You do it. And do it when the camera's running. I said, terrific. And an awful lot of things that I did, he would accept or even enlarge on, or say, okay, but bring it down a little bit. Or that makes me think of the, and it would kick him off into another direction. So I felt that I was always able to contribute creatively, as directors should make an actor feel. I don't think that a director is ever bound, so to speak, to use what an actor comes up with. But I think he is bound, if he wants to call himself a good director, to allow the actor to show him. The good directors will all do that. I got involved with the Guild because I felt that, the Guild was a terrific thing. It was marvelous. I loved the work it had done and what it had done for all of us. And I knew a little bit about the history of it. And
well, tell me about that. What you knew then?
So when the opportunity arose and I was voted in as a board member, I said, sure, I'll do what I can. It was a very quiet time during the brief tenure that I had, and not a heck of a lot came up. The thing that I remember most were the discussions with among ourselves and with representatives from the various agencies, actors' agents, and they sent some powerful guys down there. It was a little rough. I was with William Morris at the time, and when you were looking at Abe Lasvogel and a couple of other people like that, that's formidable when they're sitting at the tables with you arguing that agents should receive commission on minimum. And we were saying that not on minimum. It has to be above minimum before you pay 10%. And I remember we were all arguing that. I'd forgotten what my arguments were, except that that's, it's tough enough being an actor without paying commission on minimum. That's like making a bus ride a buck when it used to be a nickel.
Do you recall who approached you about getting involved?
No, but I know that when I first met Ronnie Reagan, he said, I understand that you're going to be a board member. And I said, well, I don't know. I know. He says, do it. He says, I recommend very strongly that you do this. Now, the funny thing is that makes me remember a thing about Ronald Reagan, of course, who was a past president. I realize how Reagan became president of the United States. It's the God's truth. I know how he did it. First, he became governor. He had to, because you couldn't become president without holding some kind of a major office first. Obviously, the people wouldn't vote for him just because he was popular. When he ran for president, the day of the election, the polls were open, let's say, from 7 to 7, or whatever, 6 to 6, 7 to 7, something like that. At high noon, I was driving down Sunset to go to Columbia Studios, and I had the radio in my car on. And at high noon, Reagan made an announcement that if he did not receive a plurality and did not become the president, that he was going to resume his acting career. That threat picked up about 3 million votes. I'm telling you, right here and now. That's how the man made it. At any rate, I told him this as a joke because he had heard this. Somebody ratted and put it in print or whatever, because I started telling it to people and they liked the story, so naturally I kept it up. And like a nut. And when we were invited to the White House years later after I did Missing, which did not go over very well with the government, we were sitting there and he says, I understand that you spread a little story, and you started repeating the story. And he says, am I getting it right? I said, yeah, you got it right, and you're telling it pretty good. He couldn't have been nicer. Anyhow, I enjoyed my time of tenure, but I must say this. I do think that I served long enough. I don't think that I basically am cut out in my makeup to be as good a board member as many others would be. I think I was too self-absorbed to really give it as much as maybe I could have. I thought I was, but I wasn't, in retrospect.
Let me read off a list of some of the people who were there with you, and if there's
Right.
if something jumps out, I'll stop. George Chandler, James Garner,
Yeah,
Charlton Heston,
yeah, Chuck was there.
Anne Duran. Anything
Right.
about these people and serving there that
No, of course, immediately I have to admit that when you say Chuck Heston, all the hair starts to rise, because I just am violently opposed to everything that Chuck believes in so vehemently. Violently. He's a paid member of the NRA. He's a paid employee. And that rankles me. And I recently got a questionnaire from him with a letter saying he couldn't believe that I was against all of these things that he believed in so strongly. And it was a written questionnaire. I was never more insulted in my life. I wrote him such a letter you don't believe. At any rate, I don't know if he'll get it, but I hope so. Anyhow, Leon Ames also was there, I think, wasn't he?
in one of these? I'll run down.
Yeah.
Well, tell me about Leon.
Well, Leon I liked because I usually sat beside Leon, and he was sort of like the elder statesman, and he was great. We would talk a lot, and he was very helpful to me about the history of the Guild and whatever the issues might be that we were discussing. He always was really right there, and he'd dig into it, and it was wonderful to listen to him, and he was extremely helpful and kind to me.
Well, here's some more people who were there when you got there late that first night. Frank Phelan, Bruce Bennett, Chick Chandler, Ellen Corby,
Yeah.
Wendell Corey, Humphrey Davis, Frank Ferguson, James Griffith, Howard Keel, Jock Mahoney, Pauline Myers, Eva Novak, Gil Perkins, Walter Pidgeon, Donald Randolph, Thurl Ravenscroft, Gene Raymond, Ray Teal, and William Walker. Quite a bunch.
Yeah. Jim Garner, I immediately took a shine to as a guy. I enjoyed Jim, and we would talk quite a bit during breaks and before and after. Walter Pidgeon I didn't get to know well, but I had great respect for him. Another sort of elder statesman, so to speak, and a delightful man, charming.
How about Jack Dales?
Yeah, very bright and totally involved. Very, very good man, Jack Dales.
Okay, you've worked with some pretty remarkable co-stars over the years.
Yeah, I have.
Anybody stands out as someone you especially liked acting with and later directing?
Yes, over the years, I have been. I don't know anybody who's had greater leading men and fellow actors, leading ladies and fellow actors. Of course, I'm very close to Walter Matthau. We've done a lot of films together. I directed him in one. He directed himself, but I take the credit. And that was Koch. He got a nomination for that. And the ladies that I've worked with, just, you know, Annie Bancroft and Jane Fonda and Lee Remick, just top, wonderful people. I don't think there's a better actress than Annie Bancroft, in my opinion. I just think she is something else. Shirley MacLaine, wonderful. Shirley is a totally different type. It's interesting, as Annie will sit, you know, she's theater trained, as I was, and she'll rehearse for hours and hours and try a scene 85 different ways, whereas Shirley doesn't want to rehearse that much unless she's changed, whereas we haven't worked for a number of years together. And she would like to do maybe one or two takes. And, well, that's fresh. There is a point to this, I guess. And she may not necessarily get the words that were written, but she's going to get close to them. Well, the first time that happened with Billy Wilder, you might as well have dropped the bomb off on the set, because Billy does not work that way. I remember about the first or second day of The Apartment with Shirley. Yes, I worked the first day, and Shirley didn't work. Then she came in the next day, and her first scene was a tough scene. She was a telephone operator, an elevator operator in this building where we both worked. And she had a scene where she started on the bottom floor, and it went on up and stopped at each floor for about 5 floors. And she kept talking with people that would get on and off at each floor. Of course, it stayed there, and the doors opened and closed. But Billy wanted to shoot it in one, with the camera set right in front. And so we did it, and Shirley was winging it, as was her wont. And at the end of the first take, Billy stopped, and Izzy Diamond, IAL Diamond, his partner, his writing partner, who's not with us now, unfortunately, came up and whispered in Billy's ear. And what he was saying is, she isn't saying a goddamn thing that we wrote. Anyway, Billy said, Shirley, come here. And he showed her the script, and he says, this is what I want you to say. And she says, word for word? He says, no. Of course, word for word. This is it. She said, okay, well, let's try it again. Well, we kept going, and it was all morning long. And finally, she went through that thing like a dose of salts. And Billy said, cut. And he looked over at Izzy, and Izzy went. And Billy said, what? And Izzy walked over and whispered in Billy's ear, and Billy said, on page 3, you forgot and. I'm not joking. Let's do it once more. I thought she was going to kill him or faint, one or the other. I don't know. She got it and did it. So from then on, we did it word for word. I've never known an actor, an interesting thing about writing, I've never known an actor that ever changed a single word that Billy Wilder wrote, that Wilder and Diamond wrote, or ever wanted to. And I've never wanted to change a single word that Mamet wrote or that Neil Simon wrote either, because there's a rhythm, and they have their own way of writing and their own style, and each piece has its own flavor and essence. And if you change or drop a word or add a word, you screw it up. You might as well try doing it with Shakespeare, and you know that won't work. It's the same thing.
I wanted to ask you just before you got into Shirley MacLaine. I can see how you would really be simpatico since you both got a big break as understudies.
Yeah.
Right? For yourself, does the magic happen in rehearsing it or in the shooting of it, or which way do you like to go?
I like rehearsal myself, especially but there's times when something inside of you is saying now, and I'll turn to the director and I'll say, let's rehearse on film, because you never know, and something magical can happen on that first or second take. I have a habit of saying magic time before every take, or before the curtain goes up, or before I make an entrance on stage and everything, which is an old habit from live TV, when they used to count down 60 seconds, and then from the booth, and then the director would say 30 seconds, and then 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, blah, 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 and the red light would go on. A friend of mine, Andy McCullough, was directing me in A Danger or Suspense, of one of the old series on anthology series on TV, and I had the first line in the first scene, and I was there and ready, and the cameras were ready, and Andy said 60, 30, he being in the booth, of course, and then he poked it and said 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, magic time. I went as high as a kite. I was totally thrown. Suddenly I just started thinking. I said, by God, it is magic time. If you do something, but if you can pull it off and make people believe these characters and what's going on, which is not at all real, then it's magic. It's a form of magic. And I've always used it as a sort of good luck omen before every take. But now and then I'll feel that we've had enough rehearsal. Let's get at it. But usually I like rehearsal, and I'll try every conceivable thing. I have no embarrassment about making a fool out of myself.
When you left the board, was it because of a particular job, or anything particular happened, or did it just seem the time was right?
In God's truth, I have forgotten. I've forgotten whether it was a commitment or something out of town. I think that was it, but I'm not positive.
Today, if a person becomes successful enough to want to have a production interest in what they're doing, they can't serve. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Because of the capacity they have as a producer? Yeah, that could be a problem. And I thought about that then too, because that did arise every now and then. You would have someone who was in some capacity producing as well as acting. And so that it could make a conflict of interest. No question.
Okay. How did you get your SAG card?
How did I what?
Get your SAG card.
How did I get my SAG card? I came out and I wasn't sure I was going to get one, because even after I found out I got the part with Judy in my first film, I said, is this going to be like Equity? The double-edged sword. If you don't have a job, you can't get your card, and you can't get a job without having a card, and one of those damn things. I said, I guess they'll have to give me a card if I have the part, but I'm not so sure. So I went to this back when we were on Hollywood Boulevard, and so I went over to the Guild, and I walked in and I said, the receptionist is the one who told me. I said, I'm going to be playing a part in a film at Columbia, and she said, terrific. And I said, but I'm not a member of the Guild. And she said, well, you will be. I said, I will? You're sure of that? She said, oh, I'm positive, yes, because you won't be playing the part unless you're a member of the Guild. So finally, the whole thing was arranged, and I was told to go over to the Guild and sign up and get my card and so forth.
Okay. We wanted to go back to...
I remember thinking that it was a pretty cheap deal for what you were getting, I thought. With the benefits of being a member and what it cost you, I always thought it was a hell of a deal.
What did it cost then? Do you remember?
No, I don't, but it was I thought, very low.
Okay, there were a couple of stories, to go back for a moment to Mr. Roberts, and then we'll go into some of the newer
Mr.
pictures.
Roberts, oh God, there was... Well, first of all, getting Mr. Roberts was truly a fluke. You know, there's crazy Hollywood stories. This is one of them. Like Lana Turner being discovered in Schwab's or something, or whatever. Well, when I first did the test with Judy for my first film, John Ford was about to start a film called The Long Gray Line, which he did with Tyrone Power, and it was about a man who goes from his 20s up to his 70s or so at West Point, working at West Point and getting to know all the cadets and ending up as being a very beloved fixture at West Point. Anyhow, they asked me to test as the old man for that part too, and I didn't know why, but Max said, just do it. So Clay Campbell, a makeup artist, built this face for me. It took about a week, where they, in those days on the prosthetics, they do one piece at a time, do a cheek, a nose, a this, a that, or anything. So they put this wrinkled stuff, stuck straws up my nose, and poured my head full of cement or something or other. I thought I was going to die. And anyhow, they made this face, and I played this guy, a 70-something, this old Irishman. And John Ford would never look at the test. He said, I want Tyrone Power, and I don't want some unknown kid. And that was the end of that. He would not look at it. Now, there was an assistant editor named Maurice Max, who was a friend of mine, and Max ran the dailies for everybody each day. That was his job. And so I had finished my film with Judy, and it had opened, and it was very successful, and everything was terrific, and now I was dying to work. But in the meantime, I knew that Ford was going to be doing Mr. Roberts, and like every other kid in the entire country that ever was set foot on a stage, I would die to play Pulver. Anyhow, when they were doing the show originally in New York, for 4 days, I went around the block 4 deep with the guys trying to get in to read and see if I could be a member of the crew. I never got in there to read for Josh Logan. But anyhow, one day at the end of Ford's rushes, Maurice Max, or Max as we just called him, tacked my screen test on and just went from Tyrone Power to Jack Lemmon. And Ford is sitting there. He doesn't know what the hell's going on. And he sees this thing, and he watches the whole scene. And Jerry Wald, who was second to Harry at Columbia at the time, was sitting next to him. And they didn't say anything. Max had the intercom on, he told me later. And then the lights went up, and Ford turned to Jerry Wald and said, "What the hell was that?" And Jerry said, "I'm terribly sorry, John." He said, there's some mistake. That was just a test we had this kid Lemmon do. He did a picture with Judy Holliday. He's very good in it. We're very high on him. But I'm sorry that happened. What? And then he said, what happened up there? And so forth. And Max said, "I'm very sorry." He said, "I made a mistake. I thought it was a continuation of Mr. Ford's dailies, and I put it on by mistake." And he said, "Okay." So Max got off the hook. And then Ford stood up, according to Max, who was looking through the little window there from the projection booth. Ford stood up, and Max could still hear them. And he said, "I'll tell you something." He said, that kid is a lousy old man, but he'd make a hell of a good Pulver. Truth. Now, months go by. I don't know anything. I walk onto Ford's set. Not months go by, weeks. And I walk onto his set just for the hell of it, to hoping I'll bump into him or to see if something would happen. And I look around, and they're in between shots, and one of the old grips comes over. He had a sort of a baseball cap sort of thing pulled down over his head and a patch over one eye, and he's chewing on a handkerchief. And he's got baggy old pants and sneakers and a blue jacket that was very worn and so forth. And he says, "Hiya." I said, "Hi." I thought he was probably a grip from the film that I'd done. I didn't remember him at first or something. And he said, "You that kid Lemmon that they got here?" I said, "Yes, sir." And he said, "I understand you want to play Pulver." I said, oh boy, do I want to play Pulver." He said, "Spit in your hand." I said, "What?" He said, "Spit in your hand. It's an Irish custom." So I looked at him like he was crazy, and he spit on his hand. So I went, he stuck his hand out. I shook hands with him. He said, "I'm Ford, you're Pulver." And he walked away and said, "My God, it is John Ford." I didn't recognize him. He looked so seedy. Anyhow, that's how I got the part. And then months went by again, and I never heard anything, like with Billy Wilder. And then one Sunday at my house, the phone rang, and a voice said, "Is Jack Lemmon?" I said, "Yeah." He says, "Leland Hayward." I said, "Oh, hi." He said, "I'm the producer of Mr. Roberts." And I said, "Yes, of course, I know." And he said, "John Ford tells me that you're Pulver." He says, "I think it'd be very nice if we met." He said, "Come down to the Beverly Hills Hotel." I did, and he made me read the whole damn play with somebody else to him. And he said, "I see. It's very good. You'll be fine." And that was that. So I was still not all the way there until that happened. And then they called William Morrison, and we made the deal. The thing I remember out of the making of the film most of all was Ford, who constantly loved to play tricks on actors. I don't believe in that, but many directors have. You know, they'll trick an actor into doing something that the actor didn't expect because that's what they want, instead of telling him and letting him do it with his own talent. That's what makes me mad about it. But at any rate, Kazan once had an extra that was a townsperson, you know, not an extra from here in town or a member of the Extras Guild, when he was shooting Facing the Crowd, I think, or whatever. And he had whoever the actor was, I've forgotten whether it was it Mathau? No. I've forgotten or whether it was Andy or Griffith or who the character was involved in this particular thing. But he was supposed to come up and have an altercation with a guy coming down the steps from a building. And so after about the third take, when Kazan was not happy with it, he had said, "Roll the camera." Camera's rolling, sound. Instead of saying action, he walked up the steps to the guy and smacked him, and then ran back towards the camera. And the guy started chasing him. He caught him, and he started to beat the hell out of Kazan. So Kazan didn't try that anymore. Well, Ford would constantly play tricks on you, and Jimmy Cagney is the one who grabbed me. We started shooting on Midway Island, which is not an island, it's a damn sandbar with a mountain, they call it. It's about a 20-foot hill of sand in the middle. That's the sightseeing thing on the entire island. It's crazy. Nothing to do there. And the guys were all getting stir crazy, the naval personnel that were stationed there. But anyway, he kept warning me. He said, neither of us have shot yet. He said, but look out, because whatever Pappy, meaning Ford, they called him Pappy Ford, he says, whatever Pappy has put down on the call sheet, don't count on it. He says, let's go over every scene we've got. Well, we got every word of every scene we've got down cold in about a week, and we just kept rehearsing them because we'd be sitting back in the bachelor officers' quarters where we were staying while they were shooting all day long on the ship. And every day we wouldn't get calls. Somebody else would they'd be doing something else. And then finally we'd get in the call sheet and they'd cancel it. And then one day we're not on the call sheet, and sure enough, at about 9 in the morning, they come running back and say, Pappy wants both of you on the thing. And Cagney looked at me and said, get ready, it could be anything. I said, well, they've got listed the scene where I come back from the laundry on the thing. He says, don't count on it. Anyhow, we got out there, and they were set up for a totally different scene, this first confrontational scene that I have with Jimmy Cagney, where he sees me and says, who are you? And how the hell could you have been on board for 9 months and I've never seen you? And I'm telling him I'm the officer in charge of laundry and morale, or whatever. Anyhow, it was a marvelous scene, but one that was supposed to be shot 2 months later. Anyway, we got there. They were set up for it. So I just went up to the, Ford says, you start up there. So Jimmy was standing down below, and I slid down the railing like I'd done it a million times, and saw the captain walk the other way, and he says, hey, hold on there. Who is that? Well, the thing came back. We did the scene. I thought Ford was going to die. He just looked at us, and he looked away. And then he looked at us again and says, you know that scene, huh? We said, we just did it. And he said, how about scene 102? So we did the lines from 102, just standing there for him, or whatever that thing was. He said, never mind. He says, you know them all? We said, yeah. And he says, that's good. I may shoot them all, one right after the other. How do you like that? And Cagney said, terrific. We'll go home earlier. And so we did the first confrontational scene. It went fine. But the one other thing I remember that was rather vivid in my mind was with Jimmy Cagney. I became very close with Jimmy Cagney and Hank Fonda and Bill Powell, all of whom are no longer with us, unfortunately. But as you know, in film, that rarely happens. The curtain drops, and although you've been a very tight-knit family, very often you don't see them anymore, or very seldomly. It isn't often that you form friendships and just continue them in between, but I remained close to all three of them and saw them constantly for years. But Jimmy was wonderful, and one night I remember he always kept an eye open on me, and I wasn't aware of it, except at times like this particular evening I'm telling you about. We were invited to a party at one of the houses. One of the officers, the non-commissioned officers, were having a chief petty officer or something or other. And we got there, and there was a whole bunch of the Navy personnel, and 7 or 8 of us from the film, and the officers and their wives, and those that did have their wives with them. Not all of them were allowed to have their wives with them. And they would, buddy, they would parade in front of each other's house when one was on duty to protect the wife, because women were a prized object, you know, on the island there, because there wasn't anything to do, and there were no women except wives. So the guys would get very jealous. There was fights all the time and so forth. Anyway, I was playing the piano, which was a mistake to begin with, because I can clear a room in 2 seconds. But anyway, I was playing the piano, and one of the guy's wives sat down on the piano bench beside me. And apparently she was snuggling up very close. I really was totally unaware of any overture whatsoever. Except now and then she would take my hand and move it to the upper keys or something or other, just kidding. And then once I do remember she did that, and then she stroked my hand. I guess her husband saw that. Suddenly there was a tremendous ruckus in the kitchen, and there was an open sort of window or area from the kitchen into the living room, dining room area where we were sitting in this little house. And I looked up and I looked in there, and all I could see was everybody holding this guy and his arm up in the air, and they were holding his arm, and he had a butcher's knife in it. And he hollered, "I'm going to kill the son of a bee." And they're holding him like that. The next thing I knew, I felt someone grab me by my shirt and literally pull me up into the air off the piano bench and push me out the door, still hanging on. And I looked back, and it was Cagney. He pushed me out there, pushed me into a Jeep, jumped into the Jeep, started it, and drove me back to the bachelor officers' quarters so fast I thought I was in an airplane. He just, he took care of me.
Did he talk about farming?
Yeah, farming and horse. You know, Jimmy, he was terrific. For instance, ecologically, he was really with it, and was telling me to read Rachel.
Rachel Carson, Silent Spring?
Yeah, yeah. Her first book, and he was saying, read that, which I did, and it helped get me kicked off into ecology, which I'm extremely obsessed with at this point.
Do you think Cagney was really ready to walk away from it all along at any point?
I'll tell you what happened with Cagney and why he stopped making films. He loved it, everything was fine, but he always said, when the day comes that I can't do it, I'll quit. It won't be a matter of age or the physical thing, but if I just am incapable of giving a performance the way I want to, then I'll quit. And he was doing 1, 2, 3 with Billy Wilder. And they were shooting in Germany. And Billy wanted to do a very long take where Jimmy was really going like a machine gun for 1.5 pages or more, and he wanted to do it in 1. And it was a mouthful. And so Jimmy would get about 3/4 of the way through it, and then he'd blow a line, or he'd blow something somewhere, or whatever. And he had a hell of a time trying to do it. Finally, he got it. He stayed calm and cool through it, and he knew that when you start blowing and then you blow again and again and again, that it gets worse because an actor gets more uptight. And if he starts getting uptight, then he's really going to just blow it. You know, right off the bat, he'll start blowing it. So he was able to control himself. He finally got it. Billy said, "Terrific. Thank you, Jimmy. We're over here now." And Jimmy took a breather, and he went outside of the stage to get some air, and he leaned against the wall. This is according to Jimmy. He leaned against the wall beside the stage door, and he just looked up and said, "That's it. I've had it. I'm through. From now on, I'm going to write and paint." And that's what he did. And he went back to the farm in New York, and which was just terrific, where he had an indoor oval there to run horses and everything, and it's a great setup he had. And he painted. He painted me a marvelous watercolor, a still life of a couple of flowers on both sides of a paper. I have it framed with glass on both sides, sitting in a little stand so you can see both sides, which I treasure. He was a good painter and a good poet. He wrote some lyrics to a song I wrote. The only problem is the lyrics are good, the song stinks. But anyway, I was very close to him.
What about Henry Fonda?
Oh, wonderful. The Rock. I used to call him The Rock because that's what he was like in a scene. You know, or the maypole, and everybody danced around him, but he was the guy who would always be the center. He'd hold everybody there without taking the scene or trying to. He would just be there, solid. He was just great, and of course enormous help in Mr. Roberts because it was his Bible. He had done it, you know, I don't know how many thousands of times, but he was a joy. I revered him. And Bill Powell was revered by all of us, I think. And he really ran the whole show for us. He ran the barracks, so to speak. He would get little muffins. He managed to steal things or wangle things from the crew and from the bakery and everything else on the island. I don't know how he did it, but we'd have a cocktail at the end of the day shooting, and he'd always have something set out, little pieces of bacon that had been cooked on toast or whatever, little hors d'oeuvres of the wildest kind I ever saw that he made himself. I don't know how he got the stuff, but he did. But Neil wrote a sequel to The Odd Couple 2, Travel in Light, that Walter and I did. We finished a couple of months ago. I think it'll be out at Easter. I hope.
And is it any good? Now, you said something about the script a while ago.
Yeah, I think that, in my opinion, it's a better script than The Odd Couple, which was one of the best. As we know, it's a classic. And I just think it's really, it, along with Some Like It Hot, are the two best comedy scripts that I've ever read, in my opinion.
And who directed?
Directed by Howie Deutsch, who did Grumpy Old Men 2. Grumpier Old Men. There was no Grumpy Old Men 2. I'm getting confused.
And was Simon there for the shooting?
Yes, Neil was around. He didn't. He wasn't there every day. Way back with the Out of Towners, he was there quite often, but he wasn't doing anything else at the time. But his new play was getting ready to open at the Amundsen Theater here. I guess it was the Amundsen, yeah. At the same time, so he was involved in that quite a bit. But he was available if necessary.
What about David Mamet? How did you get hooked up with him?
David, I think, is the toughest playwright I've ever read to do, in the sense that each hiccup, whatever it might be, you better do it, and you better learn it that way, because it doesn't quite, it goes back to what I was saying earlier about the rhythm of the piece. David has a very distinct rhythm of his own, and the characters have their own rhythm, and it's never going to be as good if you start dropping some of those little interjections. They're all there for a purpose.
I'd say the character of Shelley is just one of the most terrific parts that's been written.
Yeah, the doing of the film of Glengarry Glen Ross was it's one of the high points for me, and I thought it was a brilliantly directed film by James Foley. Marvelous piece of direction, and I think that David Mamet is if not our greatest writer, then he is in the handful of our greatest playwrights, without any question. And the part itself, oh boy. The ensemble cast, along with the cast of 12 Angry Men, which I did, Billy Friedkin directed, which I did for television, for cable. Those were the two best ensemble casts I've ever worked with. I'm not counting Mr. Roberts with those three characters, because, I mean, an entire ensemble, the entire cast, they're the best that I've encountered. I just can't imagine anybody else in any of the parts except the actors that actually did them.
You know, I don't want to embarrass you, but people have compared you to an American Olivier, and there are at least a couple of roles we can look at them. We can look at The Entertainer. We can look at Long Day's Journey. So, is King Lear on the horizon for you?
If he is, I'm too old to see him. I don't know if I'd ever play Lear. It would take a long time, because I have not had that much training in the classics, and I haven't done much Shakespeare.
Now,
it's funny, I find at first people used to poo-poo me when I was a kid starting out in town here and subjected to interviews for the first time. Because all the years that I was doing television and everything, I never did, once in a blue moon we'd have an interview. But of course it's very common in film. And I'd always say, I can't wait till I get older because the parts get richer. And I really meant it. And I felt that. I wised up as I got older. Anyhow, what does happen is there are great parts as you get older, but there's fewer of them. That's the problem. So you don't get as many opportunities, but there are great opportunities for great parts.
You've mentioned the William Morris Agency several times.
I did? Why?
Yes. Are they your agents now?
William Morris? No, I'm with CAA.
Oh, I just
Same
wondered,
thing.
how many agencies have you been with? A lot or fewer?
No, only two.
And
William Morris and CAA are the only agents I've ever had.
both agencies where a lot has happened and a lot has changed.
Yes.
William Morris is.
Yeah.
Any people that stood out that you met along the way there that?
Yes, I think that all agencies and every agent owes a debt to Stan Kamen, who was an agent at William Morris, who died a few years ago, unfortunately. He was a terrific agent, and I think he influenced in his philosophy. He was a creative agent, and he influenced a tremendous number of agents during his tenure that came through William Morris and were there for a while or a long time, either way. But Stan Kamen really had a profound influence on the entire industry, I think, and everybody at any other agency, I'm sure, would be the first to admit it.
What do you mean by creative? What was his philosophy?
Well, an agent can become creative when they can conceive of something that other people wouldn't quite see, and you end up playing a part that you die for, but that they normally would not think of you for. Another agent at William Morris got creative for a change for me, named Lenny Hershan. Back when I was doing China Syndrome, I was still with William Morris. And when Michael Douglas, who was producing it, and also playing a part, but producing it, gave it, I guess he was with William Morris then, maybe still now. He gave it to Lenny to read and suggest casting thoughts. Now, the part that I played in China Syndrome was written as about a 32-year-old young hotshot engineer who loved his job and he loved nuclear energy. Lenny read the script, and on his own, without saying anything to me, he called Michael back the day after he had read it, and he said, listen, you know, if the guy was older, it would be much more poignant and much more dramatic for him to have to cut the umbilical cord and to blow the whistle on this industry that he loves because something is wrong in that plant, and he knows it, and they won't admit it. It makes it all the tougher for the character to do it. And if he was older, it'd be more poignant and more dramatic. So Michael said, by God, I think you're right. He says, who have you got in mind? He said, Jack Lemmon. He said, that's great. I love it. And then Lenny called me, and that's how it happened. That's being a creative agent,
Wow.
I think.
Okay.
It's funny, I realize now in our talking that the 3, 4, or 5 times in my career I've gotten parts in the damnedest ways. I've been very fortunate.
You started when you served on the board, albeit briefly. You started a family tradition in a way because your son Chris.
Yeah,
did
my
the
son
same
Chris
thing.
then was on the board, yeah.
What could you say about the value of the Guild for actors today?
Well, I think we'd be lost without it. I mean, totally at sea without it. There are a few bodies in this industry that really, I feel for various reasons, are vital. The Guild, primarily, and the Academy, I think, does tremendous work in many, many ways, aside from just putting a show on. The show manages to sustain them and their awards. But now we have an award, too, which is a very, very important and prestigious one. And the AFI has done great work and continues to. Those three bodies, I think, all contribute and sort of solidify this crazy business. Actually, I don't know if they solidify it. I don't know if anybody can. It's kind of crazy. I have one great misgiving about what has happened in the industry, which is purely an emotional one, not a business one. But in the changes that have happened, when I first came in the 50s, the business was beginning to change, and it's now totally changed from a studio system to predominantly independent production, and that's terrific. Except along with it, for some reason or other, we have lost a feeling of family to a great extent throughout the industry. I don't know why, but I know we have, because I feel it, and I know that many, many of us feel it, because I talk about it with other actors. And the fun, and this is important, the fun all too often has gone out of it, because almost every picture starts out under a black cloud in many ways. And on the second day, if you're an hour behind, there's about 8 gray flannel suits that has come down there and just taking a look and saying, what's happening? What's going on? Each picture has become too important. In the old days, when there was a slate of pictures and they could cross-collateralize, there was a great benefit to that. There might have been, problems and things that were wrong about it, but there was also a great benefit because you weren't going to sink or swim on one film. But now there is no cars on an assembly line. Each one is handmade. And everybody involved in that one car, if that thing goes over the cliff, boom, they're in great trouble. And so as a result, there is a lot, as I say, a lot of the fun and the joy, whether it's a comedy or a drama, that feeling, that bubble that you get on a set has gone all too often. I have not personally felt that in my films, but I know that a lot of people have, and that a lot of films are affected like that, which is too bad.
Let's say you're talking with a young starting out actor, and we'll just take one thing we'll clear off. It's someone you cannot discourage from entering the business, so we won't even attempt that. What advice would you give them, assuming they're going to go forward anyway?
Yeah. Advising someone who wants to start out in this business in any capacity is the toughest question of all. And the longer I'm in it, the more I realize how difficult it is to answer. It's, very easy to just say, get a job, and start and keep going. Well, that's not an answer. That's, of course, what they would like to do. My personal feeling is that if you were, let's speak as an actor, which is about the only thing I know anything about, I would advise them not to go starting to try and get a part in films. Not only will they probably not get it, but they won't be prepared for it. Learning how to act in film is almost impossible because you're doing bits and pieces out of sequence. You don't get to do sustained scenes once in a blue moon. I would advise them to study because the activity is as important as what they'll learn, which is a lot. Doing something, knowing that next Wednesday night at class you have to be doing this scene with this girl or that guy or whatever, and you're going to have to rehearse and go and do it and then be criticized, I think is vital. because that activity keeps you going. It's like food. The film it was very brief. Um, I I started playing the piano by ear when I was very young, mainly because of Gershwin's music. I went away to a school outside of Boston called Andover, Phillips Andover, and the kid in the room next to me at Williams Hall had a Victrola and a bunch of old records, and he was constantly playing Gershwin. So I would hear it through the very thin walls, and I loved it. And here he'd be playing Rhapsody in Blue or some of these marvelous old show tunes that Gershwin did, and I went crazy. So they had a piano downstairs, and there was a friend of mine, Charlie Arnold, who played by ear, and he was very good. But I'd go down and I'd listen to Charlie, and I'd look at him, and like a damn fool, I just said, I could do that. So I started alone myself whenever anybody wasn't around, just doing that. And then I'd sneak into the music building at Andover where they had rooms with pianos in them. And I'd always find an empty room. And I'd start trying to figure things out by ear. The melody was simple that to figure by ear, mostly key of C or key of F. But getting the chords was the toughest thing, and the changes. And most of what I learned was by mistakes. I'd hit something and hit a wrong note and say, wait a minute, I like the sound of that. That's good. And it's the same as an actor experimenting and trying scenes different ways. So I tried different chords and combinations and everything. So I was more or less self-taught. And I still play like crazy and love to write songs. Nothing much happens to them except the highlight of my musical career was when I did Tribute as a play before I did the film. And I wrote the song that was in the play. And when we were out of town in Toronto after Boston, I got a call from Alan J. Lerner. And he said, hi, this is Alan Lerner. And I said, sure, I'm King Tut. And he said, no. He laughed and he said, it's Alan. He said, I'm not joking. And I realized it was. And he said, listen, I heard a tape that Morty Gottlieb, your producer, played for me of the melody that you're using in the show. Is it all right with you if I write a lyric to it? I said, oh, no, I would hate that. I mean, that would be terrible to have one of the greatest lyric writers alive want to put a lyric to one of my pieces of music. I said, you put down ABC or any damn thing you want. I'll put it in there. I'll sing it. I'll hum it. I'll do anything you want. I'll tap dance it. I don't care. And so he wrote a song. And nothing ever happened with the song, unfortunately, because they never pushed it and we never could get anybody else to record it. But at least he did it.
And how did that lead you to write a harmonica theme?
Yeah, the harmonica theme from Fire Down Below. What happened was that the character, Bob Parrish, who directed it, became a close friend of mine. And he, unfortunately, is not with us anymore either. It seems to me that every other sentence today I'm saying they're no longer with us. Hey, Bob thought I should play a harmonica. He said, can you play a harmonica? If not, we can dub it in later. I said, yeah, I can. Because as a kid, my father had gotten me a harmonica one Christmas, so I learned how to play a little. And I was no Larry Adler, but anyway, I could get away with it. So before we started filming any of the scenes where I played, I started trying to write a song, if I could, on it, and I wrote a very simple melody. And I started playing that in the scenes, and that's all I play. And so they liked it. And then Cubby Broccoli, who was producing it, came to see us in the island of Tobago or wherever we were shooting at that time, and he had been back in London and he'd seen all the rushes, and he said, "What's that melody that you keep playing?" And I said, "That's something I wrote." And he said, "We don't want to use it." I said, "You got it for $1." So he gave me 100. Anyway, that was how that happened. I just did it and just kept playing it. Bob Parrish didn't say no, so I kept my mouth shut and kept playing it.
You didn't bring a harmonica with you today.
No, I didn't. Thank God for you all. No, I really don't know what I'll be doing next. I have worked so much in the last couple of years. I've got Odd Couple 2 that will be out at Easter, and this film I just finished in Canada for Hallmark Hall of Fame. I don't know when it'll be telecast, but I think March to April was what I had heard. I don't know if that will hold up or not. But I want to take a long rest. I know that. I'm going to go on a safari, a camera safari with my wife Felicia in late spring when the weather is better in Africa, in Botswana, at Camp Abu. And Abu is an elephant. And he's the head elephant. He's about 60, I think. And everybody has their own elephant. And you ride on the elephant all day long in a very comfortable chair that's enclosed on the side and everything. You got plenty of room for your camera equipment and stuff. And you can either ride or you can stop and get off and walk along with the baby elephants beside Abu or your elephant. So I'm really looking forward to that. I think that'll just be sensational. And then we're going to go up to Livingston Falls, if that's what is it, Livingston Falls? I don't know, the famous falls. Anyway, I think it's Livingston Falls. And a few other places for about 2.5 weeks.
Wow.
So I look forward to that.
Well, thank you for coming to testify.
Thank you. I would, if there was anything else I was going to say, it would just be that I'm deeply grateful to the Guild and to the industry in general for the life I've had professionally.